I've been wanting to share my story for a long time and finally decided today was the day to tell you about my experience. I've been a fan for many years and am excited to see what you think of what happened to me. I hope you don't mind that this story is from a while ago because it actually took place in the summer of 1995. That summer I was only 7 years old, but I remember every detail like it happened yesterday. It was a camping trip that changed my life forever. My family lived in a small town in Middle Tennessee, and that summer my dad decided we should go camping in the woods near Turkey Creek, outside Farragut. It was my older brother's last summer at home before he went off to college, and Dad wanted to have one last big camping trip with all of us together. Our family included my mom, Dad, my 18-year-old brother, my 14-year-old brother, my 10-year-old sister, me, and our beloved dog, Jax, who was a red heeler mix. We were all excited about the adventure. The first night, the only memorable thing was the battle with the mosquitoes. Jax, our dog, woke up in the middle of the night and barked into the dark woods. Dad said it was probably just a raccoon or a deer, and he brought Jax back inside the camper to calm him down. The next morning, as soon as we let Jax out, he ran straight into the woods where he had been barking the night before. I wanted to chase after him, but Dad told me to stay put because the woods were full of snakes. So I stayed, waiting all day for Jax to come back. But he never did. As it started to get dark, Dad suggested we go looking for him. My older brothers went one way, Mom and my sister went another, and I went with Dad. We searched as much of the woods as we could, but we found no trace of Jax. Soon it was too dark to keep looking. Mom tried to reassure us, saying Jax would probably be waiting at the camper door in the morning, but I couldn't sleep because Jax was my best friend. After everyone else had fallen asleep, I decided to sneak out and look for Jax on my own. I took my dad's flashlight and quietly slipped out of the camper. I was very nervous because of Dad's warning about snakes. I walked with the flashlight pointed at the ground, hoping I wouldn't step on one. I couldn't call out for Jax because I didn't want to wake up my family, so I just hoped he would see me and come running. Suddenly, I heard a strange snorting sound that made me stop in my tracks. I pointed the flashlight straight ahead and froze. In that moment, I saw something I had only read about in stories. Standing in front of me was a creature about 8 or 10 feet tall, covered in hair. Its face looked somewhat human but had a wide nose like a monkey and a very large mouth. I was terrified, unable to scream, but the creature didn't seem to want to hurt me. It looked at me with curiosity, as if it was as surprised to see me as I was to see it. The creature extended a huge arm and gently placed its hand on my head, almost like it was patting me. The smell of the creature was strong and musky, and it jolted me back to my senses. I turned and ran as fast as I could back to the camper. The creature didn't follow me. In fact, I think it ran away in the opposite direction, just as scared as I was. When I got back to the camper, my mom was sitting on the steps waiting for me. She was very upset that I had sneaked out and told me off. If I had been any later, she would have woken Dad, and I would have been in even bigger trouble. We went back inside, but I couldn't sleep at all. I didn't tell Mom what I had seen because I knew she wouldn't believe me, and I was already in enough trouble. The next morning when we came out of the camper, there was Jax, safe and sound, tied to his tether outside. I ran to hug him, and when I did, I smelled that same strong, musky odor in his fur. It was as if he had been carried back to camp by the big, hairy creature I had seen. Dad always said another camper must have found him and brought him back, but deep down, I knew what really happened. I don't talk about this often because I don't want people to think I'm making it up. But between us, there's a creature like Bigfoot in the Turkey Creek woods of Farragut. Don't be afraid, though. It's just as curious about us as we are about it. I used to work in information technology for a company that handled chemicals. This place has since been shut down, but I worked there for about 4 years. My job was to fix technical problems and make sure all the technology was running smoothly. I installed a 24-camera security system that covered every part of the inside and outside of the facility. When I set it up, I was told to put the cameras in the testing facility on a different loop, so the rest of the employees, including myself, didn't have access to that feed. They also wanted the computers in there on a separate network. Anytime there were technical problems anywhere else, it was easy to fix. But if there was a problem in the testing site, it was incredibly frustrating. I always had to have a guard and one of the executives with me watching everything I did. They also limited my access to the exact area where the tech problem was, using thick black sheets to cover everything else. This made even simple fixes take several days longer than they should have. Once, I was working on a computer in the testing site, and they forgot to give me access to the light switch. I asked for it, but eventually I had to fix the problem using a flashlight. It was ridiculous, but they were very careful about hiding anything that happened in that area. One day I was talking with some of the workers when we heard several screams coming from the testing site. I checked the security monitors to figure out where it came from, but didn't see anything unusual. Of course, we couldn't see inside the testing site, so I used the radio to ask if everyone was okay. All the workers were fine, but everyone on the testing site was on a different radio signal. It was against protocol, but we all went to the testing site doors, knocked loudly, and asked if everyone was okay. We heard faint sounds of people moving around on the other side, but nobody answered us. Suddenly, about 10 men with rifles and hazmat suits came in and ordered everyone out of the facility. We all waited in the parking lot for about an hour, and then a man in a suit arrived and told us all to go home for the day. The next day, just as I was about to leave for work, I got a call saying the facility was shut down for a week and that I would be paid for the time off. I asked if everyone was okay, but they said they couldn't give me any information and would let me know when to come back to work. I got in my car and drove by the facility, and the gates were closed. A couple of days later, I got a call saying the facility was permanently shut down and that I would receive a severance package. Curious, I parked near a gas station close to the facility to see if I could notice anything. There was no activity for a while, and just as I was about to leave, I saw the gates open and 3 black vans drive in. The vans went straight to the entrance and opened their back doors. Men in hazmat suits started loading large black bags into the vans. Each bag required 2 men to lift. I was horrified and wondered if those were body bags. Did those people in the testing site die? I tried to calm myself, thinking maybe they were just removing the last bits of trash. But if that were the case, wouldn't they just use the dumpster out back? Something strange and possibly illegal was happening. I quickly left because I didn't want to be seen and end up in one of those vans myself. Later that night, I saw on Facebook that the building had burned down. The report said it was due to faulty wiring. I couldn't believe it, so I drove by to see for myself. The police and fire department had closed the road, and you could still see smoke rising from the remains of the building. Since then, I've moved on with my life. I moved to Wisconsin, got a new job, and now have a wonderful spouse and family. This experience made me distrustful of secretive behavior and taught me that you can be completely innocent and still end up in danger because of others. I often wonder if I could have saved everyone if I had access to the security feed. This thought weighs heavily on me, but not knowing exactly what happened is even worse. Was it an accident, or was it something more sinister? What kind of tests were they running in there, and why was it all so secret? And most importantly, why did they burn the building down? What were they trying to hide? I was a Wyoming State Patrol officer for 16 years, and I have seen many unusual situations, but I could always explain them once I had all the details. However, there was an incident in the winter of 2012 that I will never forget. Dispatch sent me to the scene of a vehicle collision involving a possible wolf. Although wolves are common in our area, they are rarely seen. Often people mistake large coyotes or dogs for wolves. From the limited information I received, I knew it was a single vehicle accident. The driver had minor injuries and an ambulance was already at the scene, so I didn't rush. The roads were lightly covered with snow, making them slippery. I assumed the snow was as much a factor in the accident as the wolf. When I arrived, the driver was being treated for superficial injuries. He was a white man in his mid-40s and didn't seem to be under the influence of drugs or alcohol. His car, an older model Ford Ranger, was on the shoulder of the road completely totaled. The front end was destroyed, The airbags had deployed, the windshield was broken, and the hood was bent in half. I approached the ambulance to speak with the driver. Considering the state of his car, I was amazed he had escaped with so few injuries. "So dispatch told me you hit a wolf," I said. The driver nodded. "Are you sure it wasn't a moose? I can't imagine a wolf causing that much damage to your truck." The driver just looked at me and said, "It was a wolf." He didn't seem to want to share more, so I decided to take photos of the scene and file my report before trying again to get the rest of his story. The fresh snow allowed me to see what had happened. There were a few other tire tracks on the road, but I could pinpoint where the impact occurred. Given the damage to the truck, I was convinced it wasn't a wolf. Even the largest gray wolf in the area, weighing around 150 pounds, couldn't have caused such destruction. I've seen less damage from collisions with moose, which often result in serious injuries or fatalities for car occupants. The fact that this man was relatively unharmed was a miracle. I searched for tracks leading from the ditch to the road to identify the animal. I found a trail, but the snow was too deep to see the footprints clearly. The vehicle tracks had erased any animal prints on the road. I crossed the road to look for signs of the animal. I doubted it had gone far after such a collision. Normally, I would just report a vehicle collision with an animal and move on, but something about this incident intrigued me, and I wanted to uncover the truth. I found a trail leading from the crash site into the forest. There were a few drops of blood in the snow, but nothing substantial. I couldn't see the footprints due to the deep snow, but there was clearly a path the creature had taken away from the scene. I followed it to the forest's edge, but the driver of the Ranger ran out of the ambulance to stop me. "Don't follow it!" he yelled. It wasn't a normal wolf. It was something else. I finally sat down with the driver to hear his story. He hesitated at first because it sounded unbelievable. He said the animal was a wolf, but larger than any wolf he had ever seen. He described it as prehistoric, like something from a time when animals were giants, but he insisted it was a wolf. He hadn't seen it on the road initially because it was completely white and nearly invisible against the snow. The only thing he saw were its amber eyes, but by then it was too late. He said he hit the creature head-on. It rolled across the road towards the ditch, but then got up, shook itself off, and ran into the woods as if nothing had happened. I didn't really believe his story, but I noted collision with gigantic wolf in my report. The EMTs planned to take the driver to the hospital to check for brain trauma, which seemed like a good idea after hearing his tale. I had to stay at the scene and wait for the tow truck, which was about 30 minutes away. I decided to keep looking for the body of this wolf. Examining the vehicle, I found some white hair stuck in the engine compartment. Maybe the driver's story had some truth to it. I followed the tracks toward the woods, where they suddenly vanished. As the sun set, my visibility decreased, but the trail disappeared with no clear end. It was as if the creature had simply stopped existing. I searched around and noticed scratches on the trunk of a large tree. There were huge claw marks up the tree and a few flecks of blood at its base. Wolves don't climb trees, but I knew I had to look up. I shined my flashlight toward the sky, and there, in the dark, were two amber eyes staring down at me. The creature had the face of a wolf, but it was unlike any wolf I had ever seen. The driver's description was accurate. It was pure white and absolutely gigantic. I was surprised the tree could even support it. I drew my gun but couldn't justify shooting. The creature wasn't attacking, it seemed to be hiding. I walked backward to the road, never taking my eyes off the animal. By the time I reached the road, it was nearly invisible against the snow, but I was sure it could still see me. It likely had been watching us the entire time. From what I could tell, it stayed in the tree until we left the scene. I don't know what exactly it was. I never saw the creature again, but I didn't expect to. I'm sure there are more out there, but they seem to do a good job of staying hidden. Every once in a while, someone encounters something they can't explain. They're out there, but they don't want to be found. Once upon a time, after working hard for a whole year, I decided to take a break and go on a vacation deep in the woods of Boone, North Carolina. I planned to spend my time hiking, camping, and taking a break from technology. Little did I know, something scary was waiting for me there. I always thought Boone was beautiful, but now I don't want to go back. I always loved nature and exploring the outdoors. I usually spent my days in front of a computer as a software designer. So I was excited about this vacation to recharge and get ideas for my next project. I packed a week's worth of food, a tent, a lamp, a cot, and a sleeping bag. I was ready to be surrounded by nature and not have any contact with the outside world. I couldn't wait for it. On the second day in the woods, after a long hike, I settled into the campsite and lit a nice fire. While getting ready to cook some food, I noticed something strange in the distance. There was a tall, dark figure watching me from behind a tree. I couldn't see any details of the figure, but it made me feel uneasy. I didn't think it was another person, because I chose this spot thinking I would be alone. The figure didn't move, and it really scared me. I tried to think of what kind of animal it could be, but it seemed too tall and skinny to be a human. I couldn't think of any animal that looked like that. Carefully, I walked towards the figure, wanting to see it up close. As I approached, I noticed something that made my stomach feel queasy. It was a tall, human-like creature with long, thin arms. What scared me the most was that it had no face. I was shocked and couldn't move. I just stared at it, unable to believe what I was seeing. I tried to understand what was happening, and then suddenly it vanished into the woods. I stood there, unable to move, not knowing what to do. I wanted to run back to my car and leave, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I tried to think logically. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Perhaps it was a teenager playing a prank, or maybe it was just my imagination. But deep down, I knew what I saw was real and terrifying. As the sun started to set, I felt a strong sensation that something was watching me. My hair stood on end, and I looked around nervously. I knew I had to leave. Even though I had planned to stay for a week, I wanted to go home more than anything. I quickly packed up my things as fast as I could. Then I heard branches cracking in the distance, and footsteps were getting closer to me. I felt really scared, and I got ready for something bad to happen. It was like being stuck in a scary dream that I couldn't wake up from. All of a sudden, the faceless man appeared right in front of me. He hugged me tightly, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. I tried to push him away, but it was like my body wouldn't listen to me. I couldn't scream or even breathe properly. I fell to the ground, trying hard to catch my breath. Everything was blurry, and I felt like I was going to pass out. The next thing I knew, I woke up feeling really scared, and the faceless creature was gone. I was all by myself, feeling scared and very confused. After calming down and thinking clearly, I packed my car and drove back home. I arrived home around 5 in the morning the next day and finally got some sleep. I started having scary dreams about what happened, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I knew I had to find out what that thing was. At first, I thought maybe it was a demon or something that took over me or stole a part of my soul. I looked for answers everywhere and got really obsessed with figuring it out. After a lot of searching, I found some articles about something called the Slender Man. I read about other people who had similar experiences with this Slender Man. Most of the stories were about kids being targeted. There was even a famous court case where a kid hurt their friend at a party because they thought they needed to do it for the Slender Man. I tried talking to experts and people who know a lot about spooky stuff, hoping they could help me understand. One person told me that the Slender Man is a scary creature from stories who likes to hurt people or make them disappear. He warned me to stay away from the woods and never go back to where I saw the Slender Man because he might be waiting for me. But I already knew that. Just thinking about North Carolina makes me feel sick now. I realized I was really lucky to survive meeting the Slender Man. It was hard to believe something like that could be real. After work, I would spend hours reading more stories about the Slender Man. But I knew I couldn't let this scary thing take over my life. I had to try to move on and live a good life. Otherwise, the Slender Man would win. I knew I had to share my story with others. I needed to warn people about the dangers of the supernatural and to urge them to stay away from the woods of Boone. I couldn't shake the feeling of fear and anxiety that stayed with me long after my encounter. I had never felt so powerless and vulnerable before. But at the same time, my encounter had given me a newfound appreciation for life and a desire to make the most of every moment. For nearly 25 years, I've been a middle school teacher, and I absolutely adore it. Knowing that I've made a difference in the lives of many kids and forming strong friendships along the way fills my heart with joy. Some of my former students still keep in touch, even as adults. Watching these kids grow up, get married, and become successful adults brings me immense satisfaction. That's what life's all about, in my opinion. But there's one classroom that sticks in my memory. I believe it's haunted by the spirits of children who passed away, and it's been a source of worry for me for a long time. I was assigned to room 303, an old classroom in the middle of our school. It had a bit of a reputation for being tough to handle, with students acting out and getting into fights. But I wasn't fazed. I was determined to turn it into a place of learning and positivity. I think it's crucial to have a positive attitude in life. If you let bad things get you down, you'll never be happy. You need to have a plan to make the world a better place and be kind to others. Life can be tough, but reacting positively makes all the difference. During my second week in the classroom, I noticed something very strange. There was a chilly breeze that crept in from the back of the room, even though all the windows were tightly shut. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just because the building was old and drafty. But then, I started hearing whispers and giggles from the back of the room. Every time I turned around to see if any students were goofing off, the room was empty. It felt like the sounds were coming from the very walls themselves, which was puzzling. Then one day, I caught sight of a tiny figure darting across the room out of the corner of my eye. I spun around, but there was no one there. That's when I started to feel really scared. I couldn't figure out what was happening in the classroom. I tried talking to other teachers and administrators about what was going on, but they just brushed it off as my imagination running wild. I felt all alone and didn't know what to do. After my classes ended, I would say a prayer, asking for protection from whatever dark forces seemed to be making themselves known to me, and to cleanse the classroom of any negative energy that might be lingering. But things took a turn for the worse. Students began to complain about seeing peculiar shadows slinking across the walls and feeling cold spots hovering around their desks. They'd come to me after class, wide-eyed, asking if I had noticed anything unusual. I didn't want to alarm them, so I always assured them it was just their imagination playing tricks on them and that there was nothing to be afraid of. But truth be told, I was scared too. Nights became restless as I tossed and turned, wondering what could be causing the strange happenings in my classroom. It got to the point where I felt like there were eyes watching me, even as I lay in the safety of my own bed. One evening, I lingered behind after school to catch up on grading papers. As I packed up my things, the sound of children's laughter echoed from the back of the room. My heart skipped a beat as I spun around, only to be met with the sight of a dark, shadowy figure lurking in the corner. It was small, like that of a child, but its features were indistinguishable in the dim light. I stood frozen, unable to move as fear gripped me tightly. The dark, shadowy shape moved closer and closer towards me. It scared me so much that I hurried out of the room, forgetting my keys on the desk. It took me nearly 20 minutes to muster the courage to go back inside and grab them. I knew I needed to find some answers. So I started digging into the history of our school. What I found out was shocking. The building had been a hospital during a bad sickness long ago. Sadly, many children had lost their lives there. When I tried to tell the school leaders what I had discovered, they didn't believe me. They brushed off my concerns, thinking I was just trying to cause trouble and scare the students. But I wasn't going to give up. I was determined to find a solution. That's when I decided to ask for help from a paranormal investigator. I used my own money to hire him to look into the strange things. The investigator told me that there were indeed spirits of children who had passed away in the building. They were stuck there, unable to move on. But he reassured me that they weren't harmful. He thought they were drawn to the energy of the students in our classroom. The investigator suggested a few ways we could talk to the spirits and help them find peace, happening in our classroom, and thankfully, he confirmed what I had suspected. The investigator told me that there were indeed spirits of children who had passed away in the building. They were stuck there, unable to move on, but he reassured me that they weren't harmful. He thought they were drawn to the energy of the students in our classroom. The investigator suggested a few ways we could talk to the spirits and help them find peace. Now that I had a reason for what was going on in the classroom, I felt less scared and more ready to help the spirits move on.